I'm great knowing that you're 50 and I'm not. Happy birthday yesterday, by the way. I kind of delayed my
Yeah.
happy birthday till today.
You pausing it? You put a pause on that?
I
Put
put
a
a
pin in
pause
it?
on it, but it's one of those reminders. You're entering into that decade. It's just a reminder that you're that much older than me.
Yeah, there's actually like this key phrase. What is it? Quinquagenarian. I think I'm pronouncing that right,
I,
which
I
is
saw you put that on somebody's post, and I thought, is he trying to claim he's Qui-Gon Jinn now? That's what I saw was Phil saying he's Qui-Gon Jinn, and
no,
I was confused. You have no robe or saber that I know of, so
no, I have no robe. I may have a saber. Um, you
maybe
got to make sure you're protected by all means, especially in dangerous times. There could be any number of.
you have a lightsaber right there on your desk. Please tell me no. Oh my word, it's not a lightsaber. But there we go. Yeah.
You just might have to spear something. That's just how it is.
Rumor is you have the most beautiful 18-year-old girl in the world staying at your house today.
I do, and three of her friends not related to me.
Yeah. I think I was talking about a different most beautiful 18-year-old girl. Thankful for those who are watching. Our daughters made it out. That's They made it out of Tampa, and we're excited for that they are able to safely. Appreciate your hospitality last night to put them up.
Absolutely.
And
our friend Kenny Embry, posted a question. I think yesterday, the day before, like, what are you doing to prepare for the storm? And my immediate answer before we had any kind of plan was open the house to refugees. And I think there's more coming up. We may have a few more arriving throughout the week.
It took a little.
Stopping out on the second route too.
It took a little convincing to tell our girls to get on the road last night.
Well, I mean, look, on a practical level, if they chose to stay in the dorms, they would be totally safe. The dorms are built to withstand a hurricane of a far greater magnitude. What they're doing is getting ahead of the lame. Like, that's what they're doing. The storm didn't push them out. The potential lame did.
My daughter is avoiding the promised "I told you so." That when you call me and whine about being without electricity for a couple of days and the food's terrible and your phone's been dead, you've not been able to do anything but sit in a burning hot dorm for 2 days with no electricity, no air conditioning, and look at your friends and do nothing. That if you call me and whine about it, then I'm going to say "I told you so." And so she got in the car and left because she didn't want to hear the "I told you so." That's a smart thing for her, because I guarantee you the food she eats this week at my house will be way better than what she would have got down there in a hurricane.
Yeah, Bob, I think I've got the same ratio right now. I'll add that the one down in Florida for you, he may not be down there working on his guns again, is he? Is this like an extra workout for him, or did the traveler switch and the muscles move north? That's the curiosity there, because there's a disparity of strength in the McPherson boys that needs to be sorted out.
Yeah. All right. Well,
hey, Terry, I got a question for you. How were those wings last night?
Those wings, made my own rub, and the youngest child was complaining that her lips were tingling because they were too spicy, and I loved every minute of it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. They were perfect.
Mint.
By the way, somebody asked me on that post, was like, what kind of sauce are you using? No sauce. If you've not figured anything out about Terry Francis, let me make sure you understand this about smoking and barbecuing. There is no sauce involved in those things. No sauce. Dry rub all the way. No sauce. We don't sauce anything on the smoker at my house, because if you know meat and you know how to season meat properly, you don't need sauce. And that is the truth. Right, Phil?
Oh, yeah. Like, look, you're doing the right job. It's good like it is. Now, I don't mind if you want to like have a more complicated outcome and you want to have a sauce on stuff. Awesome. But it will not be as good as it can be unless the brisket, pork, turkey, or whatever is smoked well to begin with.
I'll have a
use
bottle
sauce
of
to cover their sauce.
I have a bottle of sauce for you if you just have to have sauce. And I've got good sauce, like Tub Sweet Heat is a good sauce. There's plenty of good sauces. It's not just crap. There's plenty of good sauces you can use. And you can dip it if you want. But if I've done my job, you're going to take a bite of that and you're going to go, man, I don't need any sauce. I
Right.
don't need any sauce. If it's a pork shoulder, you don't need any sauce. That thing's going to be juicy and seasoned just right. And it's going to be great if I did my job right.
That's right. All right.
You know?
Back
All
to the
right,
matter
let's
at
get
hand.
into the show. By the way, real quick, do pray for the people in Tampa. We got lots of friends down there. I was talking to Edwin Crozier. He's trying to figure out, last minute preparations. Stores are already empty. Those things. There's some real fear here. This is going to be one of the most direct hits Tampa's faced in a long time. We're not worried about their safety as far as flooding and those kind of things, but they're going to be without electricity. There's going to be some damage down on the coast. It's going to be a little bit difficult and inconvenient for a couple of days. But so pray for them. Let's get into our show today, which is what about connection? Phil, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. I think it's really important that we understand that part of our job as evangelists and as deacons even, but evangelists and shepherds especially, is to work with the congregation to get them connected in a couple of ways. We'll talk about that. I think the first one we could talk about is getting them actually connected to the work itself. In Ephesians 4 in verse 11 and 12, our job is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. Our job is to equip members to actually do the work of the ministry. And I think that's important to kind of start off with, because the very first thing that we need to understand is it's our job to equip people to do this work. And too often we're not doing that. We're just doing all the work. And there may be a couple of reasons why we choose to do that. But if you're the one carrying all the load for whatever reason it is, that's not the plan. It's not the plan for you to do all the work at the local church. Yeah. So it's really important to get that in our minds first off. Our job is to equip, train, teach people how to help do this work, all of it.
And I think there's a challenge theologically, God teaching area, that comes with the stratification we use to describe the work of a local church. If I were to ask most of the members of the churches that Terry and I would be connected to, hey, what is the work of the church? They've kind of been pre-primed. The pump has already been primed to give three answers. This is what the work is, and that's what their answer would be. And look, on trying to create a framework issue to figure out these things, that's fine. The problem is the limitation of that framework then kind of pigeonholes our answers. Because that framework most often, when asked, is really about what the church can finance, not about what the church can do. And say, wait a minute, aren't those the same things? I'm like, no, they're not. Like they're really not, because some things are independent of a fiscal expectation. The local church, in regards to its edification, does actually concern itself with the connections between the members. Like it's actually a thing that they're concerned about, we ought to be concerned about. And those connections could be described as fellowship. They could be described as communion. They could be described as encouragement. They could be described as knitting hearts together, like it's described in Acts chapter 2. They could talk about any number of the one another passages in the biblical context. And leadership then determines how do we implement it. And they may implement it by money. They may implement it by advocacy. Hey, we would really like it if you would be involved with. And then you have the practical implementation of things that may not necessarily be a finance thing or an advocation of, hey, go do this. This will be good for you. Yeah. Encourage yourself this way.
The other issue with the three kind of part focus is those typically traditionally lean towards three roles. Evangelism, well, that's the evangelist. Edification, well, that's the elders. Benevolence, Acts 6, that's the deacons. And so if we're not careful, those three things aren't just money-based. They also go, well, here's the three branches of leadership that are involved in this. Yeah. And what's left in that is the members on the pew aren't involved in that at all because of that. And so there's got to be a real focus in our work to get people involved in the work. Because in Ephesians 4, if you go on down to verse 16, it talks about the whole body joined with every joint which is equipped and each part is working. I mean, the expectation here is that, and you think about 1 Corinthians 12 and 13 and 14, and I know that context is spiritual gifts, but you have that idea in Romans 12, another one, that we're members of one another, we're one body. And in 1 Corinthians 12, the idea of, look, the hand shouldn't say to the foot, I have no need of you. Within the body, everybody has a role, and there's a differentiation in that role. We're not all expected to do the same things. This Sunday, I'm going to be preaching out of John 21 there at the end. After Peter has had this conversation, he goes, well, what about John over here? And Jesus essentially says to Peter, what's that to you? You do what I told you and don't worry about John. They didn't have the same assignment, the same task, and the same role, and the same conversation. I mean, we have different ways we fit into this walk with God and what's expected. And that includes the work. The hard part is of that, Phil, I think, is understanding that as leadership of the church, that's our job to help people find those places they can fit into the work.
Yeah.
That's our job to do that.
And I'll say that, this is one of the areas where I do not think that preachers prepare themselves well for, and I'll speak for me and maybe Terry as well, that we haven't always done the best at.
Yeah.
I can identify certain areas where, hey, when it came to getting young male Christians involved in encouragement with our elders in Tennessee, I think I did a good job there. Or connecting that same young female Christian bracket to some of the older women, did a good job there. But there's a whole middle space where it was peaks and valleys. And this is an area where significant improvement can take place. But like anything else, it's going to require some thought, some advocacy, like we talked about before, and then some cooperation. You've got to do the thing that's hard. I mentioned this recently to a larger group when we were discussing congregational diversity or diversity in non-church settings. And I said, the hardest thing to do is to let go of power.
Yeah.
So you want a diverse context? That means that whoever is the majority party, whatever that means in that group, if they want to be more diverse, some part of that majority has to let go their leadership, ownership, direction to a part of the organization and become not only okay with it, but subservient to the new leadership. And we do not like the term subservient, and we do not like submission. And so that takes place here too. If you're going to embolden activity within the local church, that means there's going to be some give and take there. And that process is hard. There's no question about it.
Along those lines, there's sometimes we are just kind of in this mindset of, it's just easier to do this myself, right? When it comes to some actual things that people can help us do, it's just easier to do it myself than to get somebody else involved. But in the process, you're not helping other people be connected. It's interesting because when you do that, and I've done that before, in one sense, I could complain that these people are just a bunch of pew warmers that show up on Sunday and don't do anything. But then the rest of the time, I'm the guy not letting them do anything because I just won't, let go and let other people do it. I mean, you've got to let go and let some people do the work. And I will say that once you do that, it can be liberating, by the way, because there's a lot of things even recently I've brought other people into that it's nice. The other day I had to put a bunch of books together. I printed them, but I didn't put them together. Older couple that had offered before. I was like, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this. And they said as they left, you're never doing this again. We're going to do this. Hey, that's a work. They're connected now. Yeah. Right. And that's a menial, easy task.
And one of the things I think is important is you've got to communicate the importance of this activity. We recognize that some tasks require different sets of skill, and what might be easy for Terry and I could be hard for somebody else, right. Personality-wise, ability-wise. And so creating a wide palette of congregational facing and community facing opportunities lets people partially self-select. Hey, there's something that needs done and I can do that. And then you can build a support network underneath it to actually make this work.
Right.
Part of what motivated this from my perspective is thinking about the natural age out of Bible class teachers. There's a point where certain individual personalities at certain ages, they just don't have the energy necessary to manage a Bible class with especially younger kids in general, like they once did. And so they may have spent 35 years teaching, 45 years teaching a Bible class, and now they don't. And then we get frustrated at the congregational level. Well, why aren't they teaching anymore? Instead of rethinking and going, okay, so you served zealously and did great good for this many years here, but you still want to be involved in a local church, but your energies or your influence or your ideas have shifted a little bit. Let's find something else for you to invest in that's a better fit for now. We do that with other roles, other activities. You mature through them.
Right.
And we haven't done that one as an example well. And so we need to get better with that.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, besides that hits home with me, is we need to figure a better way to connect specifically our younger women to the work. You and I have two pretty strong-willed daughters that are good friends, and my daughter will throw in my face sometimes. Sometimes you guys only think that the only thing a woman can do is make communion bread. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the only thing, but I will say, I think in the past, we've kind of shoved women in a corner and not thought beyond kind of the most limited approach, which basically boils down to you can teach 6th grade and below, and you can make communion bread. And I think that the scriptures make greater allowance than that for women's roles within the church.
Right. And I'll add this. I don't think we need to categorically limit their role to teaching questions. Like, can they teach, not teach in these contexts?
Right.
Even though that is a necessary discussion, and while in some ways complicated, in other ways not, there is a broad base of work that the congregation needs to be involved in that has little connection to questions of authority, questions of teaching,
Correct.
who, what, when, etc.
Yeah.
And
we've made things matters of authority, which really aren't matters of authority, truthfully, if we're not careful. I don't mind throwing this fly in the ointment out there, but our sound system has an iPad that does all the controlling, and you can sit in the auditorium. There's nothing authoritative about controlling the volume of something. There's no reason.
When I mute you, is that authoritative?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. There's no reason that a female couldn't control the sound system. Now that sends up all kinds of red flags, because what you just said, well, she could mute somebody. I got to tell you, I trust some of our sisters to not mute me more than I do some of my brothers at the end of the day.
Right.
And so there's things like that we just don't really think about. I'll use an example. I think most people know that this. And both of us have this skill, but we do we do a lot of design work, you and I, and we both have, while different styles, we have good design eyes, we have good design skills. We don't put out garbage, and we think that needs to be important. For a long time, that was something I controlled because of my skill set. But we have a sister here who is a graphic design background, who's a photographer, who has a great eye. And I've started in the last year or so handing stuff off to her. Hey, here's the project. Here's what I need done. I want you to do that. And that's how it should be. I shouldn't be the only one that can design a flyer, that can design a pamphlet, just because I have a good eye. And you know what? It became, for me, Phil, at least a little liberating to not have to do everything design-wise anymore. At the end of the day. And it connects her to the work. Your social media. Here's another one that I've thought about. You know who the best people at posting social media are in your entire building?
People on social media.
Yeah, which is who?
Like, statistically, it's going to be female. It's actually going to be older than we want it to be. If you're going to be in your largest response space for where you actually post things, It's going to be Instagram and Facebook, mostly
Right.
Facebook. Instagram kind of skews down to 30 as a large bracket. Facebook, skews down to about 40 as its primary use group, and it skews female. We need to make sure that we let people have a hand in the work.
Right.
Like, is that
And
simple?
so one of the things we're working on now is that same sister who has a great design and his social media has worked in social media marketing before. Her working with our teenage girls who will help take pictures and them run a lot of our social media. And now we're getting our younger girls and a sister involved in all of that. Those are things, by the way, that aren't violating any scriptural problems there. And those are just a couple of examples. I have a pretty long list. I mean, I upload all the sermon audio. Why can't somebody else download and edit and upload the sermon audio? I edit any videos that go on the website. Why can't somebody else, probably a high school kid who understands all that stuff, edit the videos and do that? And one of us post it or him post it. There's a lot of things you can do that if you're not careful, if you're doing those things, some people aren't even doing those things, but if you're doing them all by yourself.
Mhm.
Whereas you can not only pass this work off to somebody, but you can in the process get them involved in the process. And
Yeah,
that's a huge way to connect people. Here's the encouragement. Look for those kind of things that you're doing that somebody else can do, that you can hand off.
yeah. Let me add this. Terry and I are just using some illustrations that connect to our local works,
Correct. Correct.
and it may be that in your local work, social media doesn't fit. That's absolutely okay. It may be in your local work that you don't do a lot of AV sharing. It's not something that you've found to be effective for your needs. Don't create a position that doesn't actually have value. Look at what you're already doing.
Yes.
Make sure you're
Yes.
connecting the members to what you're already doing. And I would say, from a leadership standpoint, always go back and reevaluate it after a little while. Hey, we meant it to do this. Is it doing this? And if you
Yep.
find out it's not doing that, it's totally okay to stop doing it. Um,
Right.
you know, um, I was reaching out. I've had two different conversations that are in two different directions about the use of streaming your services, um, the value of it. I would suggest that there are many congregations that temporarily needed to stream their entire service. And I'm not going to give a criteria, hard and fast, but if your congregation has 25 folks and all 25 folks are there every Sunday, and you solved it very quickly by putting a phone in front of you, and that's already been solved, it may not be necessary. And actually, it may be a net negative right now for you to be investing the extra time to do that with that person that's doing it. Could be do something that's a net positive to a local church, and be
Right.
okay with that. And so there are lots of things that you can say, well, we did it. It solved its purpose. That purpose is over now. We can turn off the live stream, and that will allow us to focus back in on what's necessary here for various reasons. We're actually contemplating narrowing our live stream off of the larger worship and just streaming the sermons as a solution. Because for the most part, our local family is able to be with us, but we still concern like everyone else does. We have family members, shut-ins, people at the edges that never even have been part of Eastside that profit from the larger worship experience that is there because they're not able to leave their home and haven't been able to do that for years. So
Right.
these are things you have to think about. Think about doing these things.
Yeah, my mom might be upset if they just show your sermons, by the way, because she tunes in for your worship service before ours. So,
I know
uh,
it
you know,
would be a net negative.
yeah. I mean, and I'll say this too. For us, one of the reasons we used to only stream sermons pre-COVID, and with reasons we've not gone back is it's our greatest infomercial for people that think, well, what does it look like? Hey, you can log in and see what our worship looks like. We're very
Yeah.
transparent about that. There's that side of it as well. I think Paul makes a great comment. We do need to know the members and what they're good at, what they're comfortable with. Part of that needs to be that when we meet with members, and that needs to happen more than it does, by the way, the leadership needs to meet with members. But when they do, there need to be conversations about how you're connected to the work and what you can do to be connected to the work. I mean, I have a list that, there was a group of us that kind of went through. Not all of them, some of them are specific. Some of them are more, generic things. I mean, you can have a crew of people, regardless of age or gender, that just their job is to walk around the building briefly after every service and just, tidy up things. Could be any host
Yeah.
of things. And that seems like so simple, but you could ask somebody to be in charge of that. You could ask somebody, hey, you know what? When somebody gets baptized, we want you to be the person that takes care of the towels. Because you know what happens is nobody ever does that. Usually
Yeah.
falls to the preacher and his wife. What about your resource room? If you have a resource room, usually you have one person over the resource room who does all of the work, and they come in, and you've seen that, Phil. They come in and they do that a couple times throughout the thing. What if you had a couple of people that did that? What if they worked on that together? There's a lot of things here that you could do. And just because, let me tell you this, when you think about this, just because one person's already doing something doesn't mean that two can't do it, or three. It doesn't mean you can't expand that. And so think, you need to go through, and my thing is, you said earlier, I'm dead on. We're not saying create things you're not doing, but look at what you're doing. Who takes the Bible class material before the quarter begins and puts it where it belongs? Why does that have to be the preacher, or it could be anybody, right? Why not get somebody to do that? Why not get somebody involved in that? There's a lot of things like that can be done, that need to be done. Is what we're saying.
There's improvement potential across the board. And this is something that I think fits neatly into a post-COVID experience, where you had this struggle to figure out, what are we going to do for the short term, a pulling back of activity by a lot of families, and then gaps. In that prior work, like someone used to do that, and that person, maybe they died, like just the straight fact that they passed because they were an older member, or they were negatively affected by COVID, or maybe they moved, or maybe their spiritual zeal has tampened down and they don't have that energy. So you have this gap that has to be filled back in. And so
I know some people
do some stuff.
I know some people, because of COVID, they just became used to being inactive. And even though they've came back, they're still inactive because it's just become a habit. Instead of watching in their living room, they're watching on the pew. And this is all an attempt to try to do this. Look, that you talk about the pot calling the kettle black with that comment, by the way. Just saying.
We'll be starting a GoFundMe for the complete Marvel makeover. They spend anywhere from $200,000 to $700,000 to get any of those actors in shape. And Neil, if you'd like to start that and fund it significantly,
it's going to take a little bit more for me.
More than happy.
It's going to take a little bit more for me. You might just be better off getting green paint and trying to paint me the Hulk. Let's move on to the second area. Yeah, let's move on to the second area of things. In addition to getting connected to the work, the other thing is extremely vital, especially post-COVID, Phil, is getting Christians connected to each other. We went through a period of time where we weren't at the building, and even when we were 6 feet apart, and we're like yelling at each other across this gap and masked up if we're inside, and you created these physical boundaries. We didn't have anybody into our houses. As we ease back in, I think some of those habits of limiting social contact have continued on, even though we're back to some degree. And we need to get people connected back to each other. This is why it's so important, by the way. Understand that in Scripture, we've talked about this before about church discipline. In Scripture, when somebody is unfaithful, the path to helping them see the need to change their ways includes a removal of a relationship as a penalty. Our problem is, so often there's no relationship to remove. It's just not. There's no penalty. They're not close to begin with. They don't have that relationship. And so we've got to figure out ways, not just to get people involved in work and action, but to build relationships between members. close relationships, family relationships.
Where it bothers you when you don't see them,
Correct.
and it's felt,
Correct.
and that's something that, you know, in all of those ways, we can certainly enable success. We can be a participant in the process of getting people back to the table again. You know, again, your sermons can take up that process. I think Colton mentioned um, earlier, you know, that
Yes.
there's a one another sermon at least once a quarter, and whatever your solution there is in the teaching advocacy space, make it matter. You know, have something, and this is something to think about. We do this all the time historically before we're going to have a special series of sermons, sometimes called a gospel meeting, call it whatever you want. The
Hmm.
Sunday or 2 Sundays before, the preaching changes its tone towards that event. If your goal is to get people to be around each other once again, then your preaching should predict the outcome you want, so that as the event comes up, people are starting to feel the press to be there, that they want to be there, that it's going to be okay to be there. You know, you can include messaging even in a sermon that may not necessarily specifically about the subject, that connects those dots.
There's a couple of things, suggestions I have to help do this. One of those is when it comes to your actual assembly, promote them like you do a gospel meeting to a degree. And what I mean by that is, hey, send out a message early in the week if you can. This is where planning helps guys like you and me out. And I don't want to harp on that path, but I could send a message out early in the week to the congregation that says, here's what we're looking at on Sunday. Here's the text. I want you to read the text. I want you to think about it. We're going to come and we're going to think about this subject on Sunday. And so you're promoting that to them. This is what we're going to do. I hope you can come and join us.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Second thing, I'm a big advocate of small groups. And you and I were talking pre-show that you're changing the way you do groups. Our groups, first and foremost, in our logo, it's kind of based in, and Edwin Crozier was the first to kind of do this, and we kind of mimicked it a little bit, or quite a bit. But it goes back to Simple Church by Tom Rainer, and you figure out what your focus is going to be. And our logo has 4 words on it, and that's where we focus on praising, learning, caring, and teaching. And that caring really points to our small groups. That's where we want to build these bridges and these relationships. We want to make connections. We got a family that's visiting with us that moved to the area from the other side of Birmingham. Last week, or this past, 2 Sundays ago, they were at our small group meeting. This past Sunday, they were at another small group meeting, and he laughed. He's like, if I stay here and visit long enough, I'm going to get to go to all the small groups. I said, probably so, because that's the whole intent. Not only do we get our members, but then if there's visitors, they're going to get invited to the small groups too. Because why? Well, Phil, nothing builds a relationship more truthfully. We can say what we want, but man's sitting down in somebody's home at a table, eating together, and then sitting around talking together. We eat and we have a little spiritual discussion and some prayers. That connects you. Our small group's going to take a couple of hours because you're going to get to know each other. You're going to spend time together. That gets you connected in a way that you cannot connect inside the church building. Big advocate of those, personally.
Yeah, we actually had families who decided to join Eastside, even though they were still figuring out some theological concerns. They started talking to us about joining the work before those questions had been answered, solely on the basis of our out of the building interaction. You know, that made a difference to them because they had, in their particular statement, never seen that level of activity. And so I think it's important to really kind of say, again, build a plan that allows everybody to participate, because all we've done is used a couple of illustrations, whether it's social media and digital environment, whether it's potlucks or social get-togethers and grouping, whatever it is that you've now intentionally thought through. Whatever group decided that, stop for a moment and make sure that you included some other people who think differently than you that are part of your local church, and bring them into the dialogue too. let them have a choice and a say in that space, because at the very least, they will offer up suggestions that you probably didn't thoroughly explore. And maybe they want to take ownership of it. Maybe they want that to be their thing. And I think it's a really big, important principle to say this has to be a shared connection, because fellowship is shared.
We also need to really, really emphasize the need for hospitality. Um, there was a time where we got away from that. I still think we have that. We just think like, well, we'll just go out to eat. It'll be easier. I don't have to worry about cleaning my house. I don't have to worry about cooking. We'll just go out to a restaurant and we get to spend time together. And that's better than nothing, Phil. But I will tell you, nothing helps you get to know people better than having people in your home. And nothing makes them feel more connected than opening up your home to them and letting them into your private, personal space. And by the way, you don't have to. Your house doesn't have to be on the market perfect to have people over. It's okay. And
the house has to look like nobody lives there. Didn't you know the rule?
Know.
Haven't you seen the rule?
That's one of the things me and my wife have had to deal with. And last night somebody stopped by the house. There's laundry on the dining room table because that's where we fold it. It's not. It looks lived in. Guess what? We live in our house. Like that's where we live, and that's okay.
No, Terry, we live in this office.
No,
we never leave the office.
It's okay. And like several years ago, my house, because of a hurricane that came through here, the basement flooded. We had to rip all the carpet up. We've not figured out how to stop the flooding from outside. So there's no floor in our basement. I have people all the time over to watch football games in my basement with concrete floor. I don't care. And they don't either, because I make good meat on the smoker. They don't care what the floor looks like. So it's important to just realize that when you allow somebody to come in to your home and there's a vulnerability there that's appreciated by them, and it develops a connection. And we need to get over those kind of things. Right. If you're coming to see, you probably need to give me 2 days, Neil, to come. If you're coming to see my house, I need 2 days. Because Peyton's room alone takes a desanitization process that's at least 36 hours. But again, it's really important, guys. And I just think that we've kind of let this. Neil said earlier, it's great to have Neil, by the way. I love all the comments. Neil said earlier, this was a problem that existed pre-COVID, and COVID just exposed it. I agree with that 100%. I agree with that 100%. We've not done a good job at connecting relationships. And I got to tell you it's got to be an area of emphasis, Phil. It's got to be an area of emphasis for us to get people closer together, to get us to love each other. Yeah. You can't love each other if the only time you see each other is at church on Sunday.
Absolutely. So let's do this. We're kind of hitting our time frame. I want to thank Terry for bringing an excellent subject to the table. That's a special moment that probably should go down in lore. We can add a little asterisk to the listing.
I actually did the work.
Yeah, I actually did the work. That's good.
By the way, funny story from last night. Our girls were in a car together. So this is what I said.
Oh, this is factual.
Text message. Yeah. And I sent them a message and said, hey, if y'all need to stay awake, you can go on YouTube and find old episodes of Do the Work. And Hallie's exact quote, your daughter was, no, I will fall asleep and we will die. That was her exact quote from the idea of watching our show.
On behalf of preachers everywhere, just realize that you have read read stories in the Bible to your kids, in part helping them go to sleep. So do not be surprised when they go to sleep when you read to them again. Like I get it with my kids. I don't
understand my wife is still sleeping, by the way. I don't understand why that is.
That's 100% accurate. All right. So like Terry mentioned earlier, we do want to make sure that we take time to pray for the various families, both those we know and those we do not, who are already and will be impacted by whatever happens with this current hurricane. Hurricanes are a natural part of living down in the alley, the spiral zone of the hurricane, tracking path. And for the most part, folks are kind of accustomed to it, but there's always risk there.
Yeah.
And so we want to certainly pray for the security of everyone during the storm. But Terry and I both know a number of aid workers, linesmen, etc., that after the storm goes through, they're actually going to be the first ones going down there. They'll go help reestablish power, checking all the emergency services, etc.,
Yeah.
praying that there is no significant harm that is done, and that whatever God's plans are will continue to be blessed. Terry, the last out.
One of our members here is with Serve Pro, and he's on one of the few national response teams. They're already packing their truck to go down there this week. I will tell you that for our friends in Tampa, just remember this as well, that once the storm's over, there's a tremendous opportunity to help your neighbor, love your neighbor, and show the love of God to other people. Yep. Storms provide that as well. We'll be praying for you. Thanks for joining us. I hope it was a profitable discussion. Reach out if there's something you'd like for us to talk about. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week.